A clip with millions of views claims that a Hindu temple in central India was cut from a mountain using technology beyond anything available in the 8th century, and that the tool marks on the stone match a cutting method no human chisel could leave. The clip sounds confident, the narrator never hesitates, and almost everything in it is wrong, including the century, the technique, and what those tool marks actually show. But here is the part the clip gets right without realizing it. The temple is real. It really was carved from one continuous mass of solid rock, from the top down, with nothing built up and nothing added. Nobody needed a spaceship to explain it. What they needed was patience measured in years, a workforce willing to spend that time, and a level of planning so exact that a single wrong cut made anywhere in the process could not be undone. That gap between the wild claim and the verified reality is where this video lives. Ancient India built temples that tracked the sun to the minute, turned solid granite into a musical instrument, cooled entire buildings using nothing but shade and airflow, and lifted an 80-ton stone to the top of a 66-meter tower without a single crane. Every one of those sentences is true, and every one of them has, at some point, been buried under a myth that is actually less impressive than the fact underneath it. So here is what we are going to do. We will walk temple by temple through the claims that get repeated most, on television specials, on viral clips, on tour guide scripts passed down for generations, and we will test each one against what historians, geologists, and acoustic engineers have actually published. Some claims survive completely intact. Some survive in a smaller, more honest form. A few do not survive at all. By the end, you will know exactly which is which, and the real version, every single time, turns out to be worth more of your attention than the myth ever was. Begin with a claim you could test yourself on a clear day with nothing but your own hand. On the eastern coast of India, in the state of Odisha, sits the Konark Sun Temple, a 13th century monument built under King Narasimhadeva I of the Eastern Ganga dynasty. European sailors once used its darkened stone as a landmark and called it the Black Pagoda. Its builders imagined the whole structure as a colossal stone chariot pulled by 7 horses across 24 carved wheels. Those wheels are the reason this temple keeps showing up in posts promising ancient technology beyond our understanding. Each wheel carries 8 thick spokes and 8 thinner ones between them. Rest a finger or a small rod at the center of the wheel, and its shadow creeps across the rim exactly the way the hand of a clock would. Visitors and researchers who have tested this report that the shadow can mark the time to within roughly 15 to 30 minutes, and in some documented readings, closer than that. That is not psychic architecture. That is trigonometry, patience, and a very good eye for angles translated into stone by people who had never seen a mechanical clock and did not need one. Here is where the myth usually creeps in. Popular retellings insist that every single one of the temple's 24 wheels functions as a precision sundial, timing the day to the exact minute, all at once. Historians are far more careful than that. What is well established is that at least a pair of the wheels, one catching the morning sun and one catching the afternoon sun, function as genuine timekeeping devices. What remains debated is whether every wheel was meant to work this way, or whether most of them are symbolic, standing for the 24 half-months of the Hindu calendar, while the 7 horses represent the 7 days of the week. That is an honest, unresolved argument among the people who study this temple for a living. It is worth more than a confident overstatement, because a temple that combines a couple of working sundials with a wheel of the calendar carved into stone is still an extraordinary achievement. It simply is not quite the every wheel is a clock version that spreads best online. Travel west across the width of the country to Gujarat, and the same instinct for precision shows up on a larger scale. The Modera Sun Temple was built in the early 11th century under King Bhima I of the Solanki dynasty. Its architects did not just decorate their temple with images of the sun, they built the entire complex to catch it. The stepped water tank, the open-pillared hall, and the inner sanctum all sit on a single straight line running east to west. Twice a year, at the spring and autumn equinoxes, when day and night split evenly, the first light of sunrise travels the full length of that line, through the entrance archway, across the assembly hall, and onto the pedestal where a golden image of the sun god Surya once stood before medieval invasions carried it away. Conservation researchers have documented and photographed this alignment repeatedly. It is not a rare fluke you might catch once in a lifetime. It happens on schedule every single year because the builders worked out the sun's path centuries in advance and built a permanent stone instrument to meet it. 3 more temples round out this part of the story, each adding a different flavor of solar precision. At the Archaeoastronomy Sun Temple in Andhra Pradesh, believed to date to the 7th century, sunlight lands directly on the feet of the presiding deity on specific days each year, passing straight through the main doorway with nothing blocking its path. At the ruined Martin Sun Temple in Jammu and Kashmir, built under the 8th century Karkota dynasty, the surviving foundations still show a deliberate framing of the sunrise through the temple's main archway. And in Bengaluru, hundreds of kilometers from any coastline, the Gavi Gangadhareshwara Temple holds a stranger trick still. Twin stone pillars are positioned so that on the evening of the Makar Sankranti festival in mid-January, the setting sun's light threads between the horns of a carved stone bull and lands directly on the temple's central shrine. An alignment so precise that crowds gather every single year specifically to watch it happen. None of this required a telescope, and none of it required help from outside this planet. It required generations of patient observation, a working knowledge of geometry, and a religious culture willing to spend decades getting a single angle exactly right. Ancient Indian astronomy, known as Jyotisha, had already been tracking solar and lunar cycles in written mathematical texts for centuries before some of these temples were even planned. What you are looking at in stone is that same knowledge, translated into architecture you can actually walk through. There is one honest gap worth naming before we move on. We do not have surviving construction manuals for most of these temples, so we cannot say for certain whether the builders used a simple gnomon, a rope and stake method, or something more refined that time has not preserved. What survives is the result, tested against the sky itself for the better part of 1,000 years, and the result still works. If sun temples prove these builders could read the sky, the next claim tests something almost bolder, that they could make solid rock sing. This is one of the few claims in this documentary that has actually been through a real laboratory, so it is worth slowing down for. In the ruined city of Hampi, in the state of Karnataka, stands the Vijaya Vittala Temple, built in the 15th and 16th centuries under the Vijayanagara Empire. Inside its main hall are 56 carved stone pillars, known locally as the Sa Re Gama pillars, after the opening notes of the Indian musical scale. Each large pillar is ringed by several slender minor pillars, and striking those minor pillars gently with a fingertip or a small wooden striker produces a distinct musical tone. Some ring like strings, some sound percussive. A popular version of this story claims the pillars must be hollow or hiding some kind of internal mechanism or even channeling some undefined form of energy, because ordinary solid stone should not behave like a xylophone. It should not, and it does not, which is exactly the point. In 2006 and 2007, a team from the Indira Gandhi Center for Atomic Research ran a genuine, peer-reviewed scientific investigation on 11 of the most famous pillars, using low-frequency ultrasonic testing, impact echo testing, and on-site metallurgical analysis. Their published results were unambiguous. The pillars are solid granite shafts with a completely ordinary granite microstructure. No hidden cavity, no embedded metal, no trick. The differing musical notes come from nothing more exotic than differences in the length, thickness, and density of each carved column, the same physics that makes one xylophone bar ring higher than the one next to it. We partly know this because of an act of doubt rather than devotion. Colonial-era British officials, suspicious that the temple was hiding treasure or machinery, once cut into 2 of the pillars to look inside. They found solid stone and nothing else, and those 2 pillars remain silent today. A small permanent scar left by someone who assumed the truth had to be stranger than it actually was. The same phenomenon shows up across South India in different forms. The Meenakshi Amman Temple in Madurai has its own set of musical columns inside its 1,000-pillared hall. The Nellaiappar Temple in Tirunelveli is said by long-standing local tradition to have once played all 7 notes of Indian classical music from a single carved block. The Suchendram Phanumalayan Temple's musical pillars are often described as sounding closer to actual instruments than to plain bell tones. And at Rameshwaram, the Ramanatha Swami Temple is celebrated less for musical pillars and more for its corridors, among the longest of any temple in India, where a single footstep or a single chant can travel and remain audible over what feels like an impossible distance. That is not mysticism either. It is a waveguide, the same basic acoustic principle used in modern concert hall design, where a long, narrow, hard-surfaced corridor keeps sound from spreading out and instead channels it straight down the hall. Why does the choice of stone matter so much here? Granite is an igneous rock formed underground from slowly cooling magma, and that slow cooling gives it a tightly interlocked crystalline structure. Sound travels through that structure efficiently with very little energy lost to internal friction. This is exactly the property you want if you are hoping a struck column will ring instead of thud. What temple builders across different regions and different centuries seem to have understood, whether through direct experimentation or knowledge passed down through generations of stonemasons, is which proportions and which densities of stone would produce a musical result. Modern acoustic science can explain why the sound happens. What remains a genuinely open question, one that architectural historians have not settled, is exactly how these craftsmen tested their stone before carving it, since a finished column cannot be uncarved. Did they carve, tap, and adjust as they went? Did they test raw blocks for acoustic quality before a chisel ever touched them? No surviving manual answers this, and that gap is worth sitting with honestly, rather than filling in with a guess dressed up as fact. What the hard, non-destructive testing does confirm, without any need for embellishment, is this. The stone is solid. Resonance explains the notes, and carving dozens of columns to precise, differing dimensions entirely by hand using only iron tools remains a genuine feat of craftsmanship, no matter how the builders got there. Sound was not an accident in these buildings. It was a design goal built into the geometry itself. Now for the claim that gets the most attention online and the one most badly served by that attention. The idea that certain ancient Indian temples could only have been built with help from outside human history, whether that means aliens, a lost hyper-advanced civilization, or technology later erased from the record. The temple most often dragged into this argument is the Kailasa Temple at the Ellora cave complex in present-day Maharashtra. It deserves a careful, direct answer, because the real story is more impressive than the myth built on top of it. Kailasa was commissioned under the Rashtrakuta king Krishna I in the 8th century, and by volume it is the largest monolithic structure ever created by human hands. The word monolithic is doing real work in that sentence. The entire temple, its courtyard, its multiple stories, its halls, its freestanding sculpted elephants, all of it was carved from one single mass of solid volcanic basalt. Nothing was assembled, nothing was added. Workers began by cutting 3 deep trenches into the cliff face to isolate a huge rectangular block of stone. And then, in a method that still surprises people the first time they hear it, they carved from the top downward, shaping the temple's crowning tower first and working toward ground level last. Estimates of the total rock removed range from roughly 200,000 to 400,000 tons, depending on which archaeological survey you consult. That range is itself an honest admission that nobody counted every block as it came out. The scholar Madhukar Keshav Devalakar calculated that a workforce of around 250 laborers, each capable of cutting about 4 cubic feet of basalt per day using iron chisels and hammers, could plausibly have finished the temple in about 5.5 years. That is a scholarly estimate, not a surviving payroll record, and it is worth being honest about that distinction too. Here is what actually settles the ancient aliens claim, and it is not a rebuttal built on incredulity. It is physical evidence sitting in plain view. Tool marks consistent with iron chisels and hammers are visible throughout the site. The top-down excavation method, while extraordinarily labor-intensive, requires no technology beyond what is well documented elsewhere in Indian rock-cut architecture, a tradition that had already been developing for centuries at Ellora and nearby cave complexes before Kailasa was ever begun. What is genuinely missing is a surviving written record naming the specific architects or describing exactly how the work was planned and paced. That absence is a real historical gap. It is not evidence of anything supernatural. ancient builders very often left us their finished work without leaving us their memos, and Kailasa is simply the single most extreme example of that pattern anywhere in the country. Every chisel stroke on this temple was permanent. There was no fixing a mistake by adding a patch of stone the way you might on a built-up structure, which means the entire three-dimensional design, down to the smallest decorative figure, had to exist in the minds of the master architects before the first cut was ever made. That is not a lesser achievement than alien intervention. If anything, it asks more of the people who actually did it. If you want a second temple that gets treated with more mystique than the facts require, look south to Tanjavur in Tamil Nadu at the Brihadiswarar Temple, completed around the year 1010 under the Chola king Rajaraja I. This one was built the conventional way, block by block, but its logistics are still genuinely staggering. The region around Tanjavur has no significant granite deposits of its own, which means every one of the temple's massive granite blocks had to be sourced from quarries some distance away and moved to the site, almost certainly using a combination of river transport, wooden rollers, and large teams of laborers and elephants. The temple's central tower, or Vimana, is commonly cited at around 66 meters tall, though some careful modern surveys put the figure closer to 60, a small discrepancy worth naming rather than smoothing over. Its capstone, called the Shikara, is a single block of granite weighing an estimated 80 tons. Getting an 80-ton block of solid rock to the top of a tower that tall, with no cranes and no pulleys stronger than rope and wood, is one of the genuine engineering puzzles of the ancient world. The most widely accepted explanation among historians is refreshingly unglamorous. Chola engineers are believed to have built a long earthen ramp, commonly estimated at several kilometers in length, gradually rising from a nearby village, and used elephants and large labor teams to drag the capstone up that incline before lowering it into place. This fits what we know of ancient construction techniques used to move massive stones elsewhere in the world. It remains the leading explanation, though no detailed Chola-era document describing this exact ramp has survived to confirm every detail. No spaceship required, just a very long, very patient hill, made of dirt. Now for the moment where I need to slow the pace down and ask you not to skip ahead, because the next temple does something with weight that sounds more like a magic trick than engineering, and it is completely, boringly, verifiably real. In Telangana, the Ramappa Temple takes a completely different approach to engineering brilliance, one aimed not at height but at survival. Construction began in the year 1213 under the Kakatiya dynasty and took around 40 years to finish. Before building a single wall, engineers dug out the foundation pit and filled it with a carefully prepared mixture of sand, lime, a fruit called black myrobalan, and jaggery, a traditional unrefined sugar. This created a foundation that could flex and absorb the shock of ground movement rather than transferring it straight into the temple's walls, functioning in a way modern engineers would recognize immediately as an early form of seismic base isolation. To cut the weight bearing down on that foundation even further, the temple's stepped tower was built using specially manufactured porous bricks with a density lighter than water. Say that again slowly. These bricks float, not as a figure of speech, not as an exaggeration. They genuinely float on water. This is exactly why UNESCO inscribed Ramappa Temple as a World Heritage Site in 2021, citing the sandbox foundation and the floating bricks by name as an outstanding example of ancient earthquake-resistant design. And the design worked in the most literal sense possible. Historical records confirm the temple survived major earthquakes in the 17th and 18th centuries that damaged or destroyed surrounding structures, while the temple itself, though its foundation slabs shifted and tilted slightly over the centuries, remained standing and structurally intact. One more stop before we leave engineering behind. In Andhra Pradesh, the Veerabhadra Temple at Lepakshi, built in the 1530s under two brothers who served as governors under the Vijaya Nagara king Achyutaraya, contains 70 carved granite pillars. One of them is the single most photographed and most misunderstood pillar in South India. Visitors slide a thin piece of cloth or paper beneath it, and the cloth passes through freely, which has fed a legend that the pillar floats entirely above the ground, either as a deliberate flex of the builder's skill or, in a competing story, as accidental damage caused by a curious British engineer during the colonial period trying to investigate its support. Neither story survives close inspection. Photographs taken directly beneath the pillar show that one corner does in fact touch the ground. it is not floating. It is tilted at an angle that happens to leave most of its base clear enough to slide something thin underneath. The most credible explanation researchers have offered is far less cinematic than either legend. The pillar most likely shifted slightly out of its original position sometime after construction, probably due to minor seismic settling or a small original placement error. That shift simply went unnoticed or unrecorded for centuries until tourists turned it into a spectacle. No formal structural survey of the pillar's exact foundation has ever been published, so a small, genuine gap in the record remains. What we can say with confidence is that the more dramatic versions of this story, divine construction or a vengeful colonial engineer, are not backed by any verifiable historical record at all. Every temple in this documentary is underneath the mythology a carefully arranged pile of minerals. The geology beneath these buildings explains almost everything about how they were carved, how they aged, and why some have survived so much better than others. Start on the Bay of Bengal at Mahabalipuram at the Shore Temple. Built by the Pallava dynasty in the early 8th century, it is recognized as one of the oldest surviving structural stone temples in South India, meaning it was built by stacking dressed stone blocks rather than carving directly into a hillside. The Shore Temple is cut from granite, and granite's tightly interlocked mineral crystals make it durable. But this particular temple has spent more than 1,300 years standing directly in salt spray and coastal wind, and the effects are visible. Salt crystals work their way into tiny cracks in the stone, and as seawater evaporates, those crystals expand, slowly prying the rock apart from the inside, a process geologists call salt weathering. Combined with constant wind erosion, this has visibly softened many of the temple's carved details compared to inland granite temples of a similar age. The Archaeological Survey of India has answered with real conservation science, including a protective breakwater built to reduce the force of waves reaching the temple's base, which is coastal engineering applied directly to the defense of ancient heritage. Travel inland to Karnataka, to the town of Halabidu, and the Hoysaleshwara Temple, built in the 12th century under the Hoysala dynasty, tells a completely different mineral story. This temple, like most Hoysala-era temples, is carved not from granite, but from soapstone, also known as chloritic schist. Soapstone is a soft, dense, metamorphic rock that carves almost like a firm bar of soap when freshly quarried, which is exactly where the name comes from. That softness is the reason Hoysala temples display some of the most intricate, almost lace-like stone carving anywhere in India, detail that would be nearly impossible to achieve in hard granite. But soapstone has a second property that made it ideal here. Once exposed to air over a long period, it gradually hardens, so a temple that was relatively soft and workable at the moment of carving becomes noticeably tougher and more weather-resistant over the following decades and centuries. Hoysala sculptors appear to have understood and exploited this directly, carving their most delicate work while the stone was still workable and letting time itself finish the job of toughening it. The Khajuraho temples, built primarily from sandstone under the Chandela dynasty between the 10th and 11th centuries, extend this same lesson about material choice from a different angle. Sandstone is a sedimentary rock formed from compressed and cemented grains of sand, considerably softer and more porous than granite. It carves beautifully and takes fine detail well, part of why Khajuraho sculptures remain so celebrated for their precision. But that same porosity makes sandstone more vulnerable to water absorption and weathering over centuries. A useful comparison sits at the Kailasa Temple in Kanchipuram, built by the Pallava dynasty in the early 8th century primarily from sandstone. Later Pallava and Chola builders working in the same region increasingly shifted to granite for their major structural temples. Many architectural historians read this as a practical response to watching earlier sandstone monuments weather faster than expected. In other words, ancient builders appear to have been running their own long-term materials experiment, watching how their buildings aged and adjusting their choices generation by generation. Exactly the kind of empirical trial and error process modern material science still relies on today. None of this required a chemistry textbook. It required something arguably harder: patient, multi-generational observation, passed down through master builder traditions of how different rock types behave over decades of sun, rain, salt air, and temperature swings. The stone itself, examined today by geologists and conservation scientists, still carries the record of those ancient decisions. South India gets brutally hot, and long before electric fans or air conditioning existed anywhere on the planet, temple architects were already solving the problem of keeping enormous stone buildings livable through the worst of the summer, using nothing but shade, mass, and moving air. The core principle at work across nearly every major South Indian temple complex is thermal mass combined with controlled airflow. Thick stone walls, sometimes several feet deep, absorb heat slowly during the day and release it slowly at night, which keeps interior temperatures far more stable than the air outside. On top of that thermal mass, architects layered a deliberate system of courtyards, corridors, and tall gateway towers that channel moving air through the complex instead of letting it stagnate. The Meenakshi Amman Temple in Madurai shows this clearly. Its layout is built around a series of nested rectangular courtyards connected through gateways, and as air moves through this maze of open courtyards and shaded pillared halls, it naturally cools, since the stone pillars and covered walkways block direct sun while still allowing air to move freely. The temple's golden lotus tank serves a dual purpose here, functioning as a ritual bathing pool while also moderating the surrounding air temperature through evaporative cooling, a simple but genuinely effective piece of passive climate control. The Srirangam Ranganathaswamy Temple, one of the largest functioning Hindu temple complexes in the world, takes this same courtyard principle to an enormous scale, with 7 concentric walled enclosures surrounding the central sanctum. Each successive enclosure adds another buffer of shade and airflow between the outside heat and the innermost, most sacred spaces. By the time a visitor reaches the sanctum at the center, they have passed through multiple layers of natural climate buffering without ever noticing it happening. At the Lingaraja Temple in Bhubaneswar and the Virupaksha Temple in Hampi, the tall gateway towers known as gopurams do double duty as both spiritual landmarks and functional chimneys. Hot air rising inside the temple's tall inner chambers has somewhere to go, drawn upward and out through these towering structures. This helps pull cooler air in through lower openings and corridors in a continuous cycle, a principle modern architects call the stack effect. Water management runs alongside climate control at nearly all of these sites. Massive stepped tanks, found at Meenakshi, at the Ekambareswar Temple in Kanchipuram, and throughout South Indian temple architecture generally, were engineered to capture monsoon rainwater, store it through the dry season, and allow it to gradually seep into the ground. This recharged local groundwater in a way that benefited the entire surrounding town, not just the temple itself. These were never decorative water features. They were functioning infrastructure, sized and positioned using a real understanding of regional rainfall patterns and underground water tables. None of these systems required electricity, mechanical pumps, or a single moving part. They required an intuitive, empirically tested grasp of thermal mass, airflow, shade, and evaporative cooling, refined generation after generation until entire towns were, in effect, cooled by the same design logic that cooled their central temple. Behind the sculpture, the mythology, and the ritual, every major Indian temple begins its life as a grid. This is the part of the story where the myths mostly fall away, because the mathematics here is not mysterious at all. It is documented in surviving texts you can still read today. Ancient architectural manuals, most notably the Mayamatam and the Brihat Samhita, a 6th century treatise by the astronomer and mathematician Varahamihira, lay out precise geometric systems for temple design, built on square grids, proportional ratios, and repeating modular units. The foundational tool is called the Vastu Purusha Mandala, a square diagram divided into smaller squares. The most common are an 8x8 grid of 64 squares, known as the Manduka Mandala, and traditionally favored for temple design, or a 9x9 grid of 81 squares, known as the Paramasayika Mandala. Each small square is assigned to a specific deity, with a central zone, the Brahmastan, reserved for the most sacred point of the structure, directly beneath where the main deity would ultimately be placed. Every wall, pillar, and chamber in the finished temple is positioned according to this underlying grid. This means the entire floor plan, however elaborate it appears to a visitor walking through it, traces back to a simple, repeatable mathematical framework. On top of that grid sits a system of proportional ratios. Architects worked with a base unit of measurement, often tied to the height or width of the main sanctum, and then scaled every other element, doorway widths, pillar spacing, tower height, as a fixed multiple or fraction of that base unit. This modular approach explains why temples built centuries apart in different regions by entirely different dynasties can still feel architecturally coherent.
They were not copying each other so much as applying the same underlying rules.
Brihadeshwarar Temple in Thanjavur offers a striking case study here, this time for its geometry rather than its construction logistics. Its towering vimana rises through a sequence of precisely diminishing tiers, each one a proportionally smaller repetition of the tier below it, creating a visual rhythm architectural historians describe as fractal-like. This means the same basic shape repeats at multiple scales throughout the structure. That is not a coincidence of style. It follows directly from the modular proportional system laid out in the classical texts. The Chenakesava temple at Belur and the Hoysala temple at Halabidu, both built under the Hoysala dynasty in the 12th century, showcase a different geometric trick entirely, the star-shaped temple plan. Hoysala architects achieved this by taking a basic square platform and rotating additional squares around the same center point at different angles, layering them together until the outline, traced from above, forms a many-pointed star.
This design is not just visually striking, but mathematically deliberate, since every point of the star aligns precisely with the rotated edges of the underlying squares. At Khajuraho, the Kendaria Mahadeva temple, built in the early 11th century under the Chandela dynasty, pushes this same modular logic vertically instead of horizontally. Its main tower is surrounded by 84 smaller subsidiary spires, each one a miniature echo of the main tower's shape, clustered and ascending toward the central peak. Art historians read this clustering as a physical representation of a sacred mountain, built from mathematics as much as from stone, with the shrinking repetition of form meant to pull the eye and the mind continuously upward. And we already met one more example of this back in the astronomy section. Modera's equinox alignment was never only an astronomical achievement, it was a geometric one too, requiring architects to calculate exact angles for an east-to-west axis centuries in advance and hold every wall, pillar, and doorway of a multi-structure complex to that calculated line with almost no room for error.
What emerges across all of these examples is a consistent picture. Indian temple architecture was never improvised. It was calculated, gridded, proportioned, and in many cases recorded in texts modern scholars can still read today. The mysticism of these buildings and the mathematics of these buildings were never two separate projects running in parallel. They were the same project, approached from two directions at once. By now, you have seen the pattern. Almost every viral myth about these temples turns out to be less impressive than the verified reality sitting right underneath it. But it would be dishonest to pretend every single question about these buildings has a tidy answer. So here are the ones that genuinely do not, alongside a couple that get treated as mysteries but really should not be.
Start with the Jagannath Temple in Puri, Odisha, which has accumulated more viral claims than almost any other site in this documentary and deserves particularly careful treatment because of it. The temple's flag is popularly said to always flutter in a direction opposite to the prevailing wind, no matter which way the wind is blowing. Some online sources attribute this to specific named university studies and named aerodynamics professors. Search for those specific studies in an academic database and they cannot be located. This is worth pausing on, because a claim that cites a study nobody can find is not evidence. It is the appearance of evidence, dressed up in scientific-sounding language to make a legend feel like a fact.
What can be said honestly is that turbulent airflow and vortex formation around tall, architecturally complex structures is a well-established, completely real phenomenon in fluid dynamics, observed around modern skyscrapers and other large buildings. So a flag behaving unpredictably in the wind disturbance created by an enormous step tower is physically plausible in principle. But no rigorously documented, peer-reviewed measurement study specific to this particular flag has been found to confirm the stronger claim, the one that says it always, without exception, moves opposite to the wind. The temple's other popular claims, that it casts no shadow at any time of day under any conditions, and that no bird or aircraft ever crosses directly above it, are not supported by any photographic survey or documented study. The basic physics of light and shadow make a genuinely permanent, zero-exception shadow claim extremely difficult to reconcile with a solid 200-foot-tall structure standing in direct sunlight. These are best classified, honestly, as unverified popular folklore, not established fact, no matter how many times they get repeated in a travel video.
Back at Konark, the Sun Temple's own history holds a real, still debated mystery, the collapse of its main tower, which the architectural historian James Harl's analysis of the surviving structure puts it somewhere around 70 meters tall originally, making it taller even than the assembly hall that still stands today. Historians propose several competing explanations for why that tower eventually came down sometime between the 16th and 19th centuries.
It may have been structural failure, as the iron beams binding the tower's core stonework corroded over time in the salty coastal air. It may have been foundation settlement in the shifting coastal sand beneath the temple. Some argue the tower may never have been fully completed in the first place, leaving it structurally vulnerable from the start. Others point to recorded invasions and deliberate destruction during regional conflicts. A colorful legend, centuries old, claims a massive lodestone once sat at the tower's peak, holding the structure's iron framework in careful magnetic balance until Portuguese sailors removed it because it was disrupting their ship's compasses, after which the tower supposedly lost its balance and fell. This story has no supporting archaeological or documentary evidence of any kind, and modern historians treat it as folklore that grew up around a real and genuinely unresolved structural mystery, rather than as the mystery's actual solution. What is verifiably true is that British colonial engineers, facing real ongoing collapse risk, filled the temple's surviving assembly hall with sand in 1903 to stabilize it, sealing its interior for more than a century. That sand was only fully cleared in recent years, allowing the chamber to reopen to visitors after over 100 years closed. And back at Thanjavur, one honest gap remains in an otherwise well-supported story. The earthen ramp theory for lifting Brihadishwarar's 80-ton capstone is the leading, most physically plausible explanation among historians and structural engineers, consistent with ramp-based lifting techniques documented at other massive construction projects in the ancient world. But no full-scale archaeological excavation has definitively traced and confirmed the entire route of that proposed ramp. So while it remains the best supported theory available, it has not been proven beyond question, the way the temple's granite composition or its height have been directly measured and confirmed.
These are the honest mysteries. A tower whose exact cause of collapse is still debated by serious historians. A capstone lifted by a method that is probable, not proven. A flag whose behavior is physically plausible but not rigorously documented. None of them require abandoning science to explain. They simply require admitting, clearly and without embarrassment, where the historical record actually runs out, which is a very different thing from where a legend decides to fill in the blanks. Which brings us to the final test, the one this whole documentary has been building toward since that first clip about aliens and impossible lasers. Here are the specific claims you will see repeated most often about the science of Indian temples, sorted honestly into 4 categories: supported by strong evidence, supported by limited evidence, plausible but currently unverified, and unsupported by available evidence.
Start with chanting, specifically the claim that it can measurably alter brain activity. This one is supported by limited but genuine scientific evidence. A small peer-reviewed brain imaging study conducted at India's National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences examined volunteers using functional magnetic resonance imaging during Om chanting. They found real, measurable deactivation in limbic brain regions associated with the body's stress response, including the amygdala and hippocampus. Separate research has also recorded shifts toward the relaxation-associated brainwave patterns known as alpha and theta waves during chanting. These are small studies, with sample sizes in the dozens rather than the thousands, and neuroscientists are still working out the exact mechanism, possibly involving stimulation of the vagus nerve through vibration felt in the ears and throat. The evidence here is real. It is also early stage, nowhere near the large, settled science that some enthusiastic claims online suggest it already is. Copper deserves a careful 2-part answer, because 2 very different claims often get merged into one online. The claim that copper vessels have measurable antimicrobial properties, meaning water stored in copper containers can see a genuine reduction in certain bacteria over time, is supported by real, well-established microbiology. Multiple peer-reviewed laboratory studies have documented significant reductions in coliform bacteria, salmonella, and other pathogens after water is stored in copper vessels for several hours, and the mechanism is understood. Copper ions disrupt bacterial cell membranes directly.
But the separate claim that copper collects or channels some undefined cosmic energy is unsupported by available scientific evidence. No physics instrument has ever measured this energy, and no peer-reviewed source describes any mechanism for it. One claim about copper is real chemistry, backed by real laboratories. The other is not chemistry at all.
The claim that temple architecture itself generates health-giving vibrations, independent of sound, chanting, or human activity, sits in the plausible but currently unverified category. It connects loosely to the real, documented effects of sound, ritual, and communal experience on stress and relaxation discussed above, but the specific claim, as it usually gets stated online, has not been measured or demonstrated by any published study we could locate. Now for the claims that land squarely in unsupported by available scientific evidence, and there is no reason to hedge on these. The claim that temples were deliberately built on measurable magnetic poles or along some mystical global energy grid has no support from India's Geological Survey, no support from published physics research, and traces back mainly to informal blog writing rather than any actual field measurement.
The broader claim that all Indian temples sit on magnetic centers is an even bigger overgeneralization with no systematic survey behind it at all. The claim that idols themselves emit measurable energy has never been demonstrated with any actual instrument in any actual published study anywhere. And the specific claim that temple bells heal the brain, often stated with oddly precise numbers about exact frequencies synchronizing the two hemispheres, goes well beyond what the real, more modest research on sound and relaxation actually supports. There may be a genuine, gentler effect from the calming ritual of a bell's tone, similar to any pleasant, rhythmic sound experienced in a meaningful setting, but the specific medical claims attached to it in viral posts are not backed by the studies they often claim to cite.
Two claims from earlier in this documentary belong in this final sorting exercise too. The apparent shadowlessness sometimes claimed for very tall temple towers falls into plausible but currently unverified, since the most likely honest explanation involves a tower's height, its tier geometry, and the practical difficulty of observing a shadow that may simply fall just beyond the visible temple grounds, rather than any actual violation of the physics of light. However, a complete, rigorously documented explanation has not been formally published for any specific case. And the Jagannath Temple's flag falls into the same category. Physically plausible in principle, given how wind behaves around large, complex structures, but not confirmed by any verifiable, specific scientific study, despite what a lot of confident-sounding websites claim.
What this whole classification exercise shows, taken together, is not that India's ancient temples are less impressive once the myths are stripped away. It shows the opposite, and it is the entire reason this video exists. The verified, evidence-backed achievements, solar alignments precise enough to mark the equinox on schedule every single year, acoustics precise enough to tune solid granite into a working instrument, engineering precise enough to lift 80 tons of stone to the top of a 66-meter tower without a single crane, foundations engineered to survive earthquakes 8 centuries later, bricks manufactured to float, are already so remarkable that they never needed exaggeration in the first place. The myths did not make these temples more impressive. They made them smaller by replacing a genuinely hard-won human achievement with a shortcut that required no human effort at all.
Remember that viral clip from the start of this video? The one insisting a temple in central India could only have been built with technology from beyond our own history? The tools that actually built it were iron chisels, human hands, and roughly 5.5 years of relentless top-down, one-way cutting into solid rock where a single mistake could not be undone. That is not a smaller story than the one the clip told. It is a far bigger one because it is a story about what people, ordinary people working with ordinary tools across enough centuries, are actually capable of when they refuse to guess and insist on getting the angle exactly right.
If there is one claim from this list you want to see tested further, or one temple you think deserves its own deep dive, say so in the comments, because that is genuinely how the next one of these gets chosen. And the next time you see a video or a plaque or a tour guide's confident aside promising you that some ancient site defies the laws of physics, you will know exactly what question to ask first. Not whether it is impressive, it almost certainly is. The question is whether anyone has actually gone and checked.